Please welcome to the stage Ashley Quinn with the Glow Center's Ozarks Inclusion Project, Wes Pratt from Missouri State University, Jasmine Bailey from the Springfield Police Department, and our moderator, Catherine Bass-Black from Odgers Berndtson.
Okay. I'm really liking this throne y'all have set up over here. So personally, I'm thrilled to be here today and just so excited to start this day thinking big with the big topic of why not here, and specifically diversity inclusion, how that can tie into all of the conversations and all the topics that you hear the rest of this day. Not only do I dedicate my career to talent acquisition and recruitment, so I know personally the critical impacts having a more diverse and inclusive workforce can have here in our community. You don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from our panelists. So I'd like to introduce three very special people today. Wes Pratt is the Chief Diversity Officer at Missouri State University. He's a Springfield native and a proud product of Springfield Public Schools. Wes has always been a champion for equal opportunity. He's experienced it all. He spent time on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and then has decided to come back and make 417 his home and a better place. At Missouri State, Wes focuses on facilitating executive efforts to promote the value of inclusive excellence, promote cultural consciousness, and collaborates with faculty, students, staff, the administrators, as well as the broader Springfield community on how we can promote diversity and inclusion here and being a more culturally conscious community. Ashley Quinn, also a Springfield native, devotes his life's work to the Ozarks Inclusion Project as the Community Resource Coordinator for the Glow Center. The Glow Center serves the LGBTQ community, 417 land, through advocacy and outreach, as well as trainings, and activities that encourage personal healing and growth. So glad Ashley is here with us. New to 417 land and recent 40 under 40 honoree is Jasmine Bailey. Jasmine grew up as an Army brat, and so all over. So we're happy to have her call 417 land home. She joined us as the police department's public affairs officer. University of Missouri Journalism School graduate. She spent 5 years in the news industry in Joplin before relocating here. And so she'll also probably share some information around what it was like to relocate to Springfield. So to start with a baseline, just to kind of level us out here and go back to basics, like really back to basics. I'm going to ask Wes to define for us diversity and inclusion in the context of how we're thinking about it and how we look at it today. So Wes, if you could kick us off.
Certainly. To begin with, diversity is not a new concept. A lot of people may use it as buzzwords, as a young friend of mine said recently, but it's all about the individual and group social differences that we bring to the pursuit at Missouri State, for example, to higher education. At the school district or in the public school system, it might be those individual and group social differences we bring to the pursuit of public education. In business and the corporate sectors, it's a pursuit of profit. So, and even with our public entities, it's about the individual and group social differences that we bring to public service. So it's a broad concept. And if any of you are really interested, I would recommend that you read Diversity in America by Vincent Perillo, because he defines for you or established for you that diversity is has been with us for a long time. So a lot of folks get it twisted, though.
So what I didn't hear was quota, race, gender. It's all about focus on social differences and being culturally conscious.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're actually talking about valuing the inclusion of diversity. And so there may be individual differences, my learning style, the way I think. But there may be group social differences, such as the fact that I'm an African-American male, that you're a Caucasian female, the fact that I may be LGBTQ+, whatever it may be, that might be my group social part of that. So the reality is, though, we have to be able to negotiate those cross-cultural differences, and that's by being respectful and being aware. And so inclusion goes to the issue of being intentional about engaging one another in a process where we value, we become more aware, more knowledgeable, and we develop the skills to negotiate those cross-cultural differences in our organizations, our institutions, or in our communities.
Thank you, Wes. Wes, I'm going to ask you to continue on a little bit further and share your knowledge of what diversity inclusion looks like here in Springfield. In particular, you could perhaps share some of the results from the Diversity and Equity Campus Climate Survey, and then take it a step further. What does the impact of that have on our workforce here in our community?
Well, I think a lot of people locally, when we start to look at diversity, particularly racial, ethnic diversity, we recognize that, things are changing. The demographics are changing nationally, locally. I remember going to school in the public school system, and the racial ethnic mix, for example, was 2% African American and 98% white. Now our public school system is about 27% racial ethnic. We have international students where 50% of our students are on fixed and low income, reduced lunch, so I got twisted there. So the demographics are changing, but that doesn't mean that we have to be intimidated or insecure about that. We did a climate study just this past April at Missouri State, and we used the higher education data sharing survey, and we looked at diversity and equity on our campus. And I think we looked at, our respondents were our administrators, our faculty, our staff, and our students. And we compared ourselves to 52 other large public institutions and private institutions. And what we found was that overall there was a feeling that we did a little bit better than the 52 institutions in reporting satisfactions on questions of diversity and equity. We reported higher agreement on behalf of our respondents that the university supports the value of diversity and inclusion, but there were some challenges that were manifested in the data. And for instance, our United States white students, men and women, international individuals, heterosexual individuals, and conservative individuals had a more positive perception or view of our campus climate. On the contrary of that, our non-binary individuals, our people of color, LGBTQ plus community individuals and liberal individuals had a little less positive view of our campus climate. But I think what stood out to me as a resident of 417 land was the fact that our students and employees had heard slightly more insensitive or disparaging remarks than comparison institutions, those other 52 institutions. But what was particularly concerning was the insensitive and disparaging remarks in our local community. We ranked like 33% to 7% more of those disparaging remarks. And I guess that was manifested by the recent Martin Luther King march that we had to celebrate his principles and the teachings of Martin Luther King. I found out like yesterday that someone had gone along and posted racist signage all along the route. So when those 1,500 folks, most of them were folks from the larger community, were marching in the cold, they had to march past this signage, which had these racist epithets. So even though some people may perceive that diversity and inclusion, we're moving forward in a lot of respects sometimes, and the perception is that we're actually not making as much progress as we could. And I think a lot of that has to do with the lack of cultural consciousness and competency, and the lack of, being really intentional about making sure that we value the inclusion of everyone.
So we've made some strides, but there is a significant road to hoe.
Oh, there's always work to do. There's always work to do.
Work to do. And given that the title of this panel is the cost of inclusion or exclusion, if we're not inclusive, let's talk a little bit further. And I think what's most important, we want to hear firsthand some of these experiences from our panelists on what is the cost of being exclusive and some of the experiences they've had. And Wes, you just shared, obviously, something that affects our broader community. Ashley, if you could share perhaps some of the experiences you've had there.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today and on this panel. So what I think of when I look at the kind of broader landscape of things for LGBT people in 417 land, I kind of acutely go back to in 2014 when the City Council passed non-discrimination protections regarding sexual orientation and gender identity, and then those were promptly put on a referendum ballot for the City of Springfield to vote on. And in the course of that, a lot of us who participated in that campaign, there were things that we did like make phone calls and knock on doors, and instead of just asking people which way they were going to vote, we told our stories. We shared vulnerable experiences of times when, like for example, for me, I used to work in commercial real estate before I worked for the Glow Center, and I basically got fired by a client because he liked his men to be men and his women to be women, and that didn't include me. And so I worked for my family basically, and so my own boss was my parents, and they let me keep my job. They didn't, but other people might have chosen the client over the new agent who didn't have that many clients yet. So I've gotten a fair amount of privilege in my own life in that regard, but I see that there are many other people in our community, people who are transgender who might apply for a job, and then and everything goes well with the interview, and the employer says, okay, we're just going to run that background check, and we'll have you in here on Monday for your orientation, and they go, just so you know, when you do that background check, I used to go by a different name, and that name is going to pop up on that background check, and then they don't actually get called back in to come in to work on Monday. And it's just over someone whose name is now Sally, used to be Bob. And everything else about them, about their qualifications to do the job, is all above board. There's no felony convictions on their record or anything like that. It's just they used to go by a different name. And so when we lost those protections here in the city of Springfield, I know for me, I walked around the next day kind of going like, because it was a 51-49% vote. It was very close. But it felt to me like half of Springfield was against me. And I wondered if I was in the grocery store, if the person I was next to in line was someone who voted to take my rights away. And that was really hard for me personally. I know there are people that we lost in our community to suicide that killed themselves after that happened. I know there are I can think of easily like a number of people in a number of different industries, lawyers, social workers, people in politics, people in tech industry who moved out of the area shortly thereafter because this wasn't a place where they could grow and take root and have families and really like live their best life. And that's a loss for Springfield, that we lost those folks. And so I think that we have a real opportunity here in Springfield and in the whole area to turn that, to flip that around. I think it's something we have to do to really do what we want to do to make to make 417 land inclusive. So yeah.
Grateful for you to be here and to share your story.
Thank you.
And the stories of others that aren't here to give their voice. Jasmine, you have a slightly different experience is coming here and being welcome to our community. Perhaps you could share some of your experience in the cost of being included as you join 417 Land and the Springfield Police Department and what that's been like for you.
Sure. As Catherine had mentioned, I'm relatively new to Springfield, and I feel like my experience here has been overall really great. I feel very welcomed in the community, and a huge part of that quality of life is my experience at work and my relationship with my supervisors, because as Wes was talking about earlier, cultural competency, it's not just about being culturally competent, but it's also about being able to apply that and being able to use that in the way that you interact with your employees who are from diverse backgrounds. I sat in with the chief just this week on a meeting with Promo, which is a statewide LGBTQ organization. We're about to roll out a new LGBTQ standard operating guideline, which will kind of lay out law enforcement interaction with LGBTQ community members. And he wanted to know what they thought about that. He wanted to make sure that the wording in that guideline was going to be the most effective it could be to make sure that those community members felt safe and felt like we were actually making strides. And so it makes a difference to work for someone who is willing to listen to the voices of other people, willing to take that step to be inclusive, and to not only try and increase diversity within the department, but also to make those people feel like they're welcome there. He said to me, he's the chief of police for all people, not just for all part of the community and then not one subsection of the community, but for all people. And so I want to work for someone who has those ideals. And that's what really keeps me here in Springfield, and that's what really, I think, contributes to my quality of life here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We thought as we met as a group prior to coming here, we were going to take some tips nationally and share them with you. But as we got to discussing among the four of us here, what we realized is there's a lot that's happening here. And as Logan kicked us off, said, "Why not here? Why are we here today? How can we be a national beacon for others?" Wanted this group to share some examples of programs and things that we're doing that you may not be aware of that we think can then be broadcasted nationally. So Jasmine, perhaps you could share some of the programs that the police department is doing. And then Wes or Ashley, if you have anything you want to contribute beyond that within the community, I would love for you to chime in as well.
Sure. So, of course, we have training, implicit bias training and bias-based police training. All of our officers are required to go through that training when they're in the academy and then once a year, every year. And then we also, like I mentioned, are about to roll out the LGBTQ standard operating guideline. There's no other department around the nation who's doing anything like that. So that's huge. Maybe you guys have heard of the Attorney General's traffic stop report that he issues every year, and it's broken down by race. So when that comes out, we look at the data and compile the data, and the chief meets with the NAACP every year, goes over why the numbers look the way that they do and what we can do to address that and to make strides forward. We've started a partnership with Unite Publication. So Samuel Knox, if you're in here, I'm really glad to be working with you. And so really our goal with that is to create content that's going to be pertinent for those readers. So the first article that I wrote for them was about the Attorney General's traffic stop report. And we just broke down those numbers and we talked about some of the training and some of the ways that we're addressing that. And then the article that you'll see come out in February is about what to do in a traffic stop. And then the next one will be about what to do in a traffic stop if you feel like you were not treated fairly, and kind of what that process looks like step by step. And so I think those are just really good steps forward that we're making to try and be a model nationally for other departments.
Wes?
Yeah, and I think the larger community has been, it's exciting to be back home. You know, I came back home in 2007, and I remember going to a Chamber of Commerce annual meeting, and at that time, Tim Rosenberry, who's now the president of the school board, had mentioned that part of the priorities for the chamber was going to be fighting poverty and promoting the value of diversity. And if I'd have had false teeth, they'd have fallen out of my head, because as a young man growing up in Springfield, it was a challenge to try to understand where I fit in the scheme of things in my own home, in my own community. And so the Chamber years ago brought the Facing Racism Institute, of which now Missouri State and the Chamber and some other partners we collaborate on, and we do it as a part of our collaborative diversity conference each year, and we do it twice a year as well. But, you know, the Chamber was instrumental in bringing that. And the emphasis is not on racism, the emphasis is on being anti-racist. It's not enough that I'm not racist. I have to be anti-racist. So when someone is saying something that's offensive, insensitive, or racist, or sexist, or chauvinist, or xenophobic, or homophobic, you speak out against that and you address that. And you develop your awareness and your knowledge. But our public entities have a public entities diversity work group, and they've been looking at how can we increase participation of minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, disabled businesses, veterans businesses, and in the contracting opportunities in the public sector. And so these are things that I am particularly excited about. Many people may not know about them, but folks have been working to promote the value of inclusion for some time now, and I think that's exciting. I think Springfield could probably be a symbol, a model for the nation when it comes to promoting the value of inclusion. It's not just diversity for diversity's sake. It's about promoting the value of inclusion and understanding that the concept of inclusive excellence means that everyone has something to give, and that we should be accepting and respecting the excellence they bring to our everyday existence.
And Tim obviously left a meaningful impact on you, and we're proud that he's also going to take on this new role with the city promoting quality of place. And there's no better role in place than to include diversity and inclusion in that as well, if we're going to be a quality of place environment.
And I think it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage, because one of the things he said was that, sometimes, moving forward, the best and the brightest may not look like me. And I thought that was a profound thing for a leader of the chamber, a leader of this community, to readily admit and readily accept. And so, but even with our public school system, they're working. They just hired the first chief equity and diversity officer. They're working to integrate diversity and inclusion into the school district, to hire more teachers and faculty and staff. So it's an exciting time, I think. We still got work to do, there's no doubt.
We're seeing a lot of movement, I think, in the public entity as well as the school systems education space. Where can our private employers play a deeper role in this conversation, these conversations as well? So Ashley, I'm going to hand it to you. And where are some of the opportunities that we can promote and be more diverse and inclusive here?
So one of the things that the Glow Center, and the Glow Center has been around since 1996, we're the longest running LGBTQ community center in the state of Missouri, and also if you scoop yourself into Tulsa, Oklahoma area and the 4 states region kind of. But so with the Ozarks Inclusion Project, we are providing trainings in the community, and it's really a way to connect LGBT people, the community, and our allies with those businesses, apartment complexes, coffee shops, employers, healthcare providers that are aware of our needs as a community and are working hard to include us and to make their spaces open and welcoming. One of those, I see Burrell's diversity officer here in the audience today. We've been working with Burrell to get all of their employees trained. And we've gotten a large number of the Springfield staff trained, and we're going to be working on going into some of the outstate regions around 417 land, and maybe even 573 area code, I'm not sure. But so I think there's a lot of opportunity just to understand things that we don't necessarily understand, and to ask the questions that are kind of awkward that you wouldn't necessarily want to ask your cubicle mate. You can ask me, and I will try to answer those awkward questions, or one of our other trainers. And I think that it's not in a lot of cases it's not ill will towards our community. It's a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding, and in some cases, like for example, with regards to healthcare, health insurance plans, there's the little like page of exclusions, and there's oftentimes a sentence that says that any kind of transition-related care for transgender folks is excluded from coverage. And so we just can't get the health care that we need because there's this like one sentence in a health insurance plan. Most employers probably don't know whether or not their insurance plan that they provide for their employees has that in it or not. And that seeps into not just their employees, but their employees' children, their spouses, everybody else in their family, and whether or not those people can get the health care that they need. So that exclusion statement is really an opportunity to be more inclusive. Yeah.
I want to be mindful of our time this morning, and really appreciated you all providing your input. If there's one piece of advice that you want to have this group take away as we're kicking off this day of big ideas and why not here, would love each of you to sort of share what that piece of advice is of what all of us can do individually as relates to the topic of diversity and inclusion. So Jasmine?
Sure. Well, I feel like first off, educating yourself is the big one. Read, interact with people who are different than yourselves. Build relationships, find ways to not only become culturally conscious, but then also find ways to apply that in the workplace. And then I think the other big takeaway I hope people walk away here with is to be willing to take risk. Be willing to be one of the first in the nation to write a standard operating guideline for LGBTQ, or to do something that just shows that you're willing to be inclusive and that you see those sections of our community and that you want them to know they're welcome in your space.
Yeah, and I also think valuing the inclusion of diversity is everyone's business. It's not just Wes Pratt being the Chief Diversity Officer at Missouri State. It's everyone's business. And so I think we need to be cognizant of that fact. And then we have to be intentional. We have to be willing to be intentional about becoming aware, becoming knowledgeable, and hopefully developing the skills that are necessary to negotiate cross-cultural differences in a global society and a global economy.
I want to echo what both Jasmine and Wes said, and also to say, be vocal about it and let people know. If we have this reputation of being a super white town or not an LGBT-friendly town or something like that, we need to tell people differently. I know, like Mother's Brewing, for instance, I think we get to enjoy them for happy hour later. They joined our Ozarks Inclusion Project, and when they did that, they realized that their own company policies didn't actually include gender identity and sexual orientation, even though that was really part of their culture. And they were really quick to go in and change the policy and make sure that that was actually written into their policy so that folks know that. So people in our community, wherever we are, whatever kind of diverse background we might come from, we're looking for those clues. We're looking for those people to stand up and say, yes, we actually mean you. Come and join our team.
And so I think we ask and appreciate very much your comments and thoughts there. And I think we ask today, we love kicking off the day with this conversation because we're hopeful that you all can take these comments, these remarks, and think about how that can apply to why not here. And as you hear the conversations and the topics and the big ideas that you're going to listen to today, where does diversity and inclusion fit within that? And what is the role that each one of you can do personally to have an impact? So why not here? What is your role and what can you do? So with that, I think we'll conclude our conversations this morning and excited to hear from the next group as well. So thank you.